who are similarly looking for achieving the potential of trade and investment with partner countries. I think India is in a position to play a prominent role in that and be an attractive destination for businesses of its trading partners. So let me not take too much time. We have a very interesting set of participants, distinguished participants. I'm sure we are looking forward to their comments. And so let me just once again thank everyone and say that I look forward to hearing of all the other very distinguished participants and the broader messages that this event spread over a few days sort of reveals to all of us to be taken forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that, You mentioned, members from the UK joining us on this, session. But I'd also like to say that there are members from Mauritius, from Maldives, from South Africa, Singapore, New Zealand, the USA, and many other countries who are also watching us right now. And I think one of the key takeaways for all of them from the words you spoke to us is collaboration between like-minded countries and how that's going to be key if we all have to tide over the uncertain times that COVID-19 has brought upon us. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Radhavan. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to extend our warmest welcome to our first keynote speaker this evening, Lord Karan Bilimoria, CBE, DL, President of the Confederation of British Industry and founder and chairman, Cobra Partnership UK. Lord Bilimoria is active in a wide range of matters, including commerce, entrepreneurship, education, culture, minorities' contributions, and academia. He has been acknowledged as an ambassador for Britain, India, and the Parsi community. We are also grateful for his consistent support to the IOD family in India over many, many years. We are very happy to welcome you, sir, today. And before we hear your thoughts, just a reminder for all our attendees that there may be time to take a few questions from all of you. So do hear all our speakers. And in the chat box, you are free to leave any questions that you have as a follow-up. It's over to you, Lord Bilimoria. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Can I just check that you can hear me clearly and see me clearly?
Absolutely, sir.
Marvelous. Well, it's great to be with the IOD, with the Directors Conclave, and I was very happy just now to hear what Dr. Anup Wadhwana had just to say, and I'm really encouraged by the sentiments that you've expressed, and particularly the collaboration and looking ahead to the UK-India relationship beyond Brexit. And I think you're absolutely right that this is a moment of change. This is a moment of opportunity looking forward. And at the outset, I'd like to thank General Ahluwalia, an old friend who served with my father, the late General Bilimoria. And it's always great to be with the General. Thank you for organizing this event. What a world that we're living in. I have recently, just 4 months ago, been appointed as president of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, and I'm the first member from the ethnic minorities to be appointed to this position. It's taken 60 years, the history of the CBI, for this to happen, and I'm delighted that it's an Indian that is holding this role. And what a time to take over the presidency. I mean, it's a great challenge at any time, but to be president at this particular moment in history, where we have the most challenging environment, certainly since the Second World War, where the globe is concerned. This has affected every country in the world. And we are in the midst of a health pandemic and an economic crisis, the deepest recession most of our countries have ever known. And it's taken its toll. We've had 3.5 months of lockdown in the UK. India has experienced months of lockdown with deserted high streets, production lines silent. In my own business, wearing my Cobra beer hat, we manufacture the biggest brewery in Britain in the Midlands near Birmingham. And when it came to the lockdown, all our restaurants, the 7,000 restaurants that we supply, shut down. And some of them did takeaways, but basically the majority of our business was shut And it, of course, reverberates right through the supply chain. That's this pandemic and economic crisis. It reverberates all the way through the supply chain, both domestically and globally. And even in the brewery, although we could produce for the supermarkets, we had to shelter some of our employees for health reasons. And from the vast range and array of products that we produced, from draft to small bottles to big bottles to cans to different varieties of Cobra beer, we had to scale down to just one stock keeping unit, the big bottle Cobra, to be sold in the supermarkets. And we had to survive for the 3.5 months on just that one stock keeping unit. And that's what's happened in this crisis, is we have all had to adapt. We've had to adapt at speed. We've had to adapt in terms of taking on this technology that we're using now. I attended the Hyderabad Public School, one of the schools that I attended, and one of our most famous alumni is Satya Nadella, the head of Microsoft. And he said in the middle of this crisis, he said, in 2 months, we've adopted technology that would have taken years to adopt. We've had use of this over the past years. We haven't been using it. Now we're using it. Necessity is the mother of invention, and we're really making the most of it. Millions of people's livelihoods are at risk. We have had amazing initiatives over here, and I remain optimistic about the future. And I want to say that right up front, because I've seen in the middle of the crisis here in the UK, in the depths of the crisis, business stepped up to the plate. We used to look at China, and it started there, and we saw the Chinese. I'm sure all of you remember those films of those bulldozers, and they built this huge hospital in 10 days. And we said, oh, only the Chinese can do that. And you know what we did over here? We realized very quickly that government on its own cannot work. Government has to partner with business. And what we did is the government, the NHS, National Health Service, the armed forces engineers, including the Gurkhas here in the UK, the University of East London, the local university, and the Excel Centre, the largest exhibition centre in the UK in East London, all collaborated, and we built a 4,000-bed, critical bed, a hospital, 4,000 bed in 9 days. And that was only done through collaboration. We've now replicated those hospitals around the country, where we have these hospitals around the country that are a backup that we need as we're going through the second wave of the coronavirus. And when you work in collaboration, you can achieve huge amounts. Our Chancellor of the Exchequer, and here's the wonderful news. Just look at it. When I was at Cambridge University in the 1980s, I remember in 1987, we had a big celebration because we had the first 4 ethnic minority members of parliament elected to the House of Commons. There was one Indian in the House of Lords who'd been at Birmingham University with my mother, Lord Chitnis. And the 4 that were elected included an Indian, Keith Vaz. So there were 5 ethnic minority members in the House, both Houses of Parliament in 1987. We stood on the steps of Westminster Hall in 2012 to celebrate the silver anniversary of this. And there were 69 of us on those steps in 25 years, from 5 to 69. And after the last elections just now in December, we stood on the steps of Westminster Hall, and there are now over 100 ethnic minority members of the House of Commons and in the House of Lords. And right amongst them are the Indians. Who is the Chancellor of the Exchequer? The second highest position in this country is Rishi Sunak, our 40-year-old Chancellor, who is Cabinet Minister, son-in-law of Narayan Murthy. We have Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, another great office of state. We have Alok Sharma, the Business Secretary. And I could go on. So there we are, the Indians, reaching the very top. And the Chancellor has moved proactively. And this is the thing, you've got to move at speed in a crisis. And you've got to take the initiative. And in March, not only did we have the lockdown, but we realized what we've got to do is save companies and save jobs. And so we instituted a furlough scheme. And this scheme has now been replicated around the world by many countries. This scheme in the UK has saved 9 million jobs and 2.5 million self-employed jobs, where the government paid up to 80% of the salaries of employees and self-employed people to just save those people and save those jobs. That furlough scheme comes to an end at this month. And now we've got another version of it to help out, because we have a tiered system that is to help out depending on what stage of lockdown we're in the country. So it's not easy, but we've done it. And I think looking ahead, I will tell you one more reason why I'm very optimistic. One, When we started this crisis, we didn't have the PPE. We didn't have the critical care beds. We were testing in March 2,000 people a day. We are now, and the treatments, we didn't know really how to treat this disease. Vaccine, the vaccine trials were sort of starting, people are talking about a vaccine. Just look at the way the world has worked at speed, the UK and India, that from March to October in a matter of 7 months, we are now in the UK have the critical care beds, we have the PPE, we have discovered treatments that save people's lives. Many of these treatments were existing drugs that have now been repurposed, including many manufactured in India. And when it comes to vaccine trials, who is the leader? Who is the leader? The leader in this race, a global race of hundreds of trials going on, is the Oxford University, where I'm proud to be a fellow of Kellogg College and also a fellow of the university. We have the Oxford University trial that is leading the race. And the Oxford University trial is partnered with AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca is a Swedish-British company headquartered in Cambridge, my old university, where I'm also a fellow at Sydney Sussex College at Cambridge. So you've got our great universities collaborating with business. And who is AstraZeneca's partner? Biggest partner in this vaccine is none other than my friend Dr. Cyrus Poonawalla and his son Adar, the Serum Institute of India in Pune, the biggest vaccine manufacturers in the world. And they've got a contract for 1 billion doses of this vaccine. So there we are, Sweden, UK, Oxford, Cambridge, India, collaborating, and we've got the vaccine. So I'm very confident. And here's another reason I'm very confident. That in July, we started opening up our economy. When we started opening up our economy, the restaurants opened, the bars opened, the gyms opened. We were starting to get life back to normal. People were going back to the offices. By August, the government sponsored a brilliant scheme by Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor, the Eat Out to Help Out. Discounts given at restaurants to help the restaurant industry, help consumers, and it worked superbly. We were back on a road to recovery. We bounced back very, very quickly when we were given the opportunity. Now we've got the second wave. I know when we get through at the other end, we've already proven that we can bounce back very quickly, and I think we can. What we need is to stay resilient. What we need is to have a bridge of the government support, the private support, working together, and then we can get through. One of the things we're working on over here in the UK is mass testing. We have now got $5 15-minute antigen tests that have been developed. Just imagine in the UK, if we could test our population regularly, twice a week, or even once a week, test people arriving when they're from other countries, universities, schools, factories, offices. By testing regularly, you pick up positive cases, you get them tested with a laboratory PCR test, they isolate, everyone else carries on. And that's the way you can get the economy firing on all cylinders. And that is something we're very close now to be implementing here. Before I want to conclude, I just want to say, what is it? What is it that's going to make us competitive, the UK? Dr. Wadhawan spoke about leaving the EU and Brexit. Well, we've left. We left on the 31st of January. The transition period comes to the end at the end of December. I still believe that the UK and India have this phenomenal special relationship. We all talk about the UK's relationship with the United States. Of course, that's a special relationship. That will always be a special relationship. Who is our number one biggest trading partner for the UK? It's the European Union as a bloc. It's 45% of our trade. But the number one country that is our trading partner is the United States of America, with over 15% of our trade. So America will always be a very, very, very important country to the UK. But India is a country where we have this very special relationship, where I think we're scratching the surface. We could be doing so much more, whether it comes to trade in goods or services and interactions with universities and innovation. And that I will end on is the real power going ahead. And that is the power of innovation, collaboration between the UK and India. So I will conclude. I've got one last thing to say. If there are any questions, which I'll say after the questions, which will take me a minute. But I've left a few minutes now if you want to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Lord Bilimoria. We do have questions, and I must say the optimism in your words, is really appreciated right now, and the sense of collaboration that you have mentioned, as did Dr. Vadhavan. In fact, we have a question for both of you. I'll start with you, Lord Bilimoria. We have a question. Seeing the current crisis, how can businesses prepare for the crisis of future?
Yes, I think, again, the crisis of the future, that you can never predict these crises. Who predicted 9/11? 9/11 happened, nobody predicted, it changed the world. Who predicted the global financial crisis? Very few people. One of them was Raghuram Rajan, our former governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He's one of a handful of people in the world who predicted it. Nobody predicted this pandemic. It's how you deal with it. And well, I was going to save it to the end, but I will now tell you what I was going to save at the end. One of my professors at Harvard Business School and a former dean of the London Business School, Professor John Quelch, when the crisis started, right at the beginning, he sent me an email and he said, Karen, this is something you might want to share. 7 C's to lead in a crisis. And I've been looking at this every single day, and he's been absolutely right all these 7 months. And the 7 C's are: 1, calm; confidence; communicate; collaborate; community; compassion; and cash. So those 7 C's you've got to have to lead through a crisis.
That's a very interesting take, and some good takeaways there, really. And here's a question now from an audience member for both Dr. Vadhavan and you, Lord Bilimoria. Let me start with you, Dr. Vadhavan. Our audience member is asking that the pandemic caused a lockdown, and it was being said that we are moving from global to all things local, yet organizations from across the globe are coming together for the vaccine efforts. What would you say about the future of global trade in this respect?
Yeah, certainly. You see, we need to take a hard look at the lessons which are offered by this experience. I think it's happened in the past, lessons from the global financial crisis, lessons from 9/11, they've been factored in, and to that extent, our businesses and the way of doing things becomes more secure. So we need to factor in some of these lessons which I alluded to in my remarks. And you see, the global family is integrated, and globalization, I think, is something which is here to stay, something which has on the whole benefited the world, and something we need to build on. We need to learn our lessons in terms of such episodes which might bring out some adverse aspects, which might bring out the need to take care of certain aspects. So we need to factor that into our relationship in the globalized world. And it is the local that leads to the global, you see. So we all need to focus at some level on our domestic economies, make them strong, make them competitive, make them equipped to deal or engage, let me say, engage with globalization. So I don't see any contradiction between the local and the global. It is the local which has to be made strong for nations to be in a better position to engage with the world, to be more beneficial to the world, for all outcomes to be, mutually beneficial. So, so there is no contradiction in my mind between the local and the global, and I think India is an example of that. We are focusing on aspects which will strengthen our economy, which will enable us to serve the world better, which will enable us to engage with the world more fruitfully and in a more mutually beneficial way. Thank you.
Your local strong before you go global?
Radhika, we didn't hear you.
Agree with the sentiment that Dr. Vadhavan put forward, that it's important to focus on the local, because that's a step towards global trade and global collaborations.
Yes, absolutely. And it is this combination always of local and global. But the key word here is keeping an open view all the time. And this is why I say, look at the United Kingdom. It's only 1% of the world's population. It's a small country. I mean, compared with India, 1.3 billion people. And yet, why is it the United Kingdom, to this day, is the second largest recipient of inward investment in the world, in the whole world? Second largest recipient of inward investment. I think one of the reasons for that is that we're a very, very open economy. And then you also have to have all the backup to attract people to invest. So whether that's your universities, whether that's your manufacturing base, whether it's your lawyers, your accountants, your institutions, in our case, built up over centuries, then make it a very attractive place to come and invest. And then you're a gateway to Europe as well. And then you're globally a good place to have a global headquarters. So all that makes the UK a fantastic attraction, but also it's totally in the context of being global. So it's always about being global. So it's being open and outward looking, which is the key. And that's why I think the India-UK partnership has phenomenal potential, because we have that approach together.
Absolutely. And, there is so much anticipation really on what will come off more collaborations between the UK and India. Thank you very much, Lord Bilimoria, for those words. Also, Dr. Vadhavan, for, giving us answers to those questions that came in from the audience. It's time actually now for us to move on to our next keynote speaker. That's Mr. Sameer Garde, President, Cisco India and SAARC. Now, as the COVID pandemic unfolded globally, it is technology really that has made it feasible for organizations to remain connected and productive as they race to leverage digital capabilities and navigate what we know as the new normal. In India, Cisco has been a key empowering tool for organizations. India sees the second highest usage of Cisco's virtual meeting app WebEx after US. And of course, it is via WebEx that we all are connected right this moment. Mr. Garde is a highly respected leader, and his keen understanding of technology and market opportunities enables him to drive transformation and capture critical market transitions. We're very pleased to welcome you, Mr. Garde, and your thoughts on how technology is helping us reimagine business in the future are much anticipated. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, Radhika. I hope you can see me and hear me clearly.
Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you so much. It's going to be a tough act to follow Dr. Vadhavan and Lord Bilimoria. That was a very engaging and very optimistic talk and Q&A session. Very, very inspiring, I must say. But I'd like to begin by saying thank you to General Ahluwalia and Mr. Kapoor for hosting this conclave and considering me to be part of it. I was here 5 months ago, thoroughly enjoyed engaging with the IOD members and other guests who were part of the event. So actually, I've been looking forward to this conclave. And I'd also like to thank all of you for your time. I do understand that there are a ton of webinars that happen nowadays, and it's not very easy to keep engaged. So I'll try and keep it short and as optimistic as possible in these environments. Since the last time I was here in June, the focus for the world has shifted. And I think Lord Bilimoria and Dr. Vadhavan both mentioned that. It's shifted from mere survival to exploring what this crisis really means for the future. And more importantly, the opportunities it kind of provides to all of us, right? And to capitalize on these opportunities, I think companies are realizing that bold, drastic measures must be taken. And this is probably the best time to embrace change, innovation, and to abandon literally the familiar and experience really the new things that this provides to all of us. In fact, I would say it's probably the perfect time to innovate. And today we have the opportunity to innovate and reimagine the way we work, we do business, the way who we are as companies, and as communities, and even as a country for that matter. And I think we've seen all examples of most of these things play out during the course of this last 7 months. Now, during these conversations that I have with my stakeholders, customers, partners, suppliers, innovation comes up as a prime component for a majority of them. But what does innovation really mean for the future of business, right? And the way I kind of see it, the innovation can be broadly bucketed in 4 categories, right? And I'll talk a little bit about each of those categories. It's innovation in how you work, innovation in how you do business, innovation for the greater good and fostering of inclusion, and innovation of culture, right? I think we kind of discount sometimes how much impact this 7 months has had on our personal culture and in the communities that we work in. So let me start with innovation at work, right? We have around 13,000 employees for Cisco here in India. A large proportion of them are innovating and driving engineering prowess for a technology company like Cisco. We've 40% of our workforce, even before the pandemic, was enabled to work from home, and around 30% used to work from home, thanks to all the collaboration tools that we've invented. And before the pandemic, we were, through this 12,000, 13,000 odd people that we had, our R&D teams were filing approximately 2 patents a week, right? And we were a little worried about what will happen to innovation during this time, the last 7 months. And I must say, it's great to come back and say that, we continue to innovate. We continue to drive the same 2 patents per week through the course of the last 7 months. And it kind of showed me that you don't have to have the same room to innovate, right? It was probably a little overrated in terms of how we used to work. And while the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of remote hybrid workplaces, it has also fast-tracked transformation of work outside so-called knowledge jobs. So I gave you an example of a knowledge job scenario, but I think there has been a lot of innovation in frontline jobs, right? Like firefighting, for instance. I mean, who would have thought you will use drones for firefighting? I think we are seeing a kind of innovation that has accelerated probably tenfold in just 7 months. What probably would have taken 3 years or 4 years or 7 years to happen is already started happening. I mean, drones doing firefighting is probably less heroic, but definitely much more efficient, right? And safe. And in several labs in Europe, I'm told a robo called Flowbot 1 has been assisting the staff in collecting and analyzing samples and generating COVID test results at 1,000 tests per day, right? Now imagine the pace at which we need this for around 7.5 billion people around the world, right? Both the testing and the vaccination procedure that will need. You will need technology at the heart of both the testing and the vaccination that this world will require. I mean, these are just a few of the several instances that show just how innovative workplaces have become. And work itself has become very different from what we knew about. And while the workplace is changing, I think the businesses are also changing. And this is mainly because the individual is evolving, right? The primary consumer sentiment that we are hearing right now is, if I can do it online, I will. And this is not just limited to consumer-focused companies, but even SMEs, enterprises, everybody would prefer to do things online. For instance, even in Cisco, we've transitioned nearly 30% of our business from pure hardware to a software-oriented business, which is SaaS provided and is cloud provided. And if you think about it, that's a massive transformation for a company, which was seen as a hardware-focused company. So as the consumer becomes more digital, companies need to reinvent their products, their portfolios, that they need to think more virtual and go global to capitalize on level playing fields created in this new world order. I think everybody is equal, which is kind of dangerous in a new world, right? Because if you are online, you can be as powerful as a large corporation. We've seen gyms, we've seen hospitals, we've seen schools, even governments change their operating models very, very quickly. And I think we've seen, and Lord Billimoria kind of alluded to that, companies are bringing innovation into their supply chains and making them more distributed, both from a sourcing and a service perspective and servicing perspective. And lastly, I think on the business side, what we're seeing is, given the significant impact on business activity during the pandemic, not all companies are focusing on innovation, which is a bit surprising sometimes. In fact, many, I would say a majority, are deprioritizing innovation to concentrate on conserving cash, which was the last C that Lord Billimoria talked about, right? Minimizing the risk because you want to save cash, and fortifying their core business. But the way I see it, if there was ever a time to innovate and experiment, it's now. I think it's better to look at how you can get out of areas which you may not think will work for you, divest from those and invest in newer areas where you can innovate. And we've seen similar payoff in Cisco too. I won't talk too much about that. I think innovation for sustainability, innovation for inclusion, and innovation for diversity is yet another area that we've seen evolving. And the use of technology in this fast-tracked world that we are in. In the past few months, we've seen how companies, individuals, and governments have worked together to create solutions for the greater good, solve larger challenges for our communities, right? For instance, actually, we joined hands with Akshay Patra, which was doing midday meals for students, which were obviously not coming to school during this pandemic, right? We had actually connected all their kitchens and brought in a tremendous amount of efficiency through our network capability. Akshay Patra actually used these 7 months and these kitchens to feed the migrant workers. Now think about how quickly they would have had to adapt, and that would not have been possible without the use of technology. We've obviously seen in the healthcare industry, which has been talking about telemedicine for a very, very, very long time. And that got accelerated multifold during the course of this pandemic. And we've seen immense pressure on the hospital infrastructure. And I think having these telemedicine facilities in this environment was a boom. In fact, I was talking to a doctor the other day, and the doctor told me, Samir, it takes me between 35 minutes to 40 minutes to get in and out of a PPE. So if I don't need to do that, I can see 3 or 4 more patients if it takes me 10 minutes to see a patient, right? So I think we don't understand the importance of how technology has changed the way medical health is reaching people. And I think there is, I would say, it is driven by intent to make a difference for our communities, and powered by technology will be that will be the game changer for the new world. And finally, innovation and culture, right? This kind of innovation is possible only when there is the right culture and nurture. We've realized that people are actually having too many meetings because they believe that they can be at home anytime, right? So we've actually started doing one simple thing, which is every 1.5 months, we give a day off for all our employees globally. And every quarter, or sometimes twice a quarter, we're telling them it is a no meeting day, no internal meeting day. If you have to meet your customers and partners, that's fine, but no internal meetings will be held. I think it's a cultural change which we never thought would be required. So before I close, I'd like to say that we are at a critical moment. In a way, COVID-19 has forced the entire world out of its comfort zone. I am looking forward to more and more innovation and remain optimistic about how this world will come out of this crisis and become even better than it was pre-COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Garde. And I think we'd all agree that it is innovation that can really be a catalyst in bringing change to our communities. And I think we completely agree with you there. We've actually got a question from an audience member which is related. And we've been asked, what strategies can boards adopt to ensure innovation through the boardroom?
Yeah, I think, this was a discussion that we recently had with a few directors on the board of some large companies, and 2 areas kind of emerged, right? I think one is how can directors challenge the executives to use digital as the first port of call, right? And I think it's becoming more and more important that if you think digital first versus saying, I will think the normal way and then transfer that into digital. The second thing, I think everything comes and cuts both ways, right? What we are seeing is, as a result of a lot of things going digital, I think what you're seeing is the risk of cybersecurity as a threat, right? Today, even an LED bulb is a potential way for a cybersecurity threat to happen. So I think we have to balance these from a board perspective in terms of pressurizing the executives to think digital first, but at the same time balancing that with ensuring that you're doing the right thing from a cybersecurity.
Thank you very much for answering that. And your words around innovation are something that do resonate with most of us listening to you. Thank you very much indeed. We now will move on to our next keynote speaker. Let me introduce to all of you Mr. Terry Heyman, Chief Financial Officer of World Gold Council, world's market development organization for gold, as you would know. He's a proven leader with vast experience across the gold supply chain. Mr. Heyman leads the various programs of work around ESG, including supporting further progress by the gold industry in helping to deliver the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and address climate change. He also oversees the World Gold Council's initiatives on standard setting, including development of the responsible gold mining principles, the conflict-free gold standard, and the guidance note on all-in costs. And all of these measures have really increased transparency and integrity in the gold industry. We are related to welcome you, Mr. Heyman, and thank you very much for your great support to the IOD over the years. We cherish you as part of the IOD India global family. It's over to you.
Radhika, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Delighted to be here, and it really is a pleasure being part of this IOD Directors Plenary. And I think such an important topic as well, as we look out to the future, as we think about where are we heading, what lessons have we learned from 2020, and what does that mean for reimagining the future of business? And thinking about the greater good, as we've just heard about, and indeed we've heard about through a number of sessions already today. So my thanks to IOD for giving us the opportunity, and we're delighted to partner with the IOD for this event. I'm going to talk a little bit around one of the big themes that we've seen through 2020, which has been the increased attention and awareness around ESG, environment, social governance, but more broadly, I would say, the role that business plays in contributing to the greater good, in playing a meaningful role in today's society. And I think that's been brought to the fore this year. I think it's no accident that there has been increased interest from capital markets in ESG, looking to move capital to investments and opportunities that are concerned about operating responsibly and providing a common good. And that is inextricably linked to good governance and into the way that business is set up and is organized. So what I would like to spend a few minutes about talking to today is looking at what the gold industry is doing as we think about reimagining the future of business. And hopefully I put some slides up and you are able to see that. And the World Gold Council is delighted to be able to look at the role that gold plays, a really important role that gold plays in our financial security, and connect that to the role that gold mining plays, and indeed the entirety of the gold industry plays, in terms of supporting responsible business activity that serves the needs of all of us, that serves the needs of investors and consumers of gold, but also serves the needs of communities and the broader society that are found around where gold mining occurs, and the role that we as a business sector have in helping to reimagine the future and helping to demonstrate how we are supporting delivery of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So a very brief introduction. We are a membership association. Our members are the world's leading gold mining companies, 28 member companies, very large publicly listed gold mining companies operating all around the world. And we work very closely with our members to set out a vision as to what constitutes responsible gold mining, and indeed what constitutes the role that the gold mining sector plays in supporting the social and economic development of individuals, households, nations around the world. There's a very important role that gold plays in helping to secure financial security, financial sustainability, and we want to make sure that across the entirety of the gold supply chain, the gold industry is at the fore and is taking its responsibilities very seriously. And it's because of that that we set out last year, September 2019, the Responsible Gold Mining Principles, working with our members very closely, again, the world's leading gold mining companies. We have defined what constitutes responsible gold mining. And this is grouped into three categories: governance, environment, and social. And each of those three are really important. governance to make sure that boards and management are undertaking their responsibilities appropriately, are paying attention to the needs of serving society in the right way, are not are operating ethically, are not allowing themselves to lower their standards, are thinking about impacts that they have to a broad group of engaged stakeholders, and indeed understanding the connections around the supply chain. Society, such an important aspect that's been brought to the fore this year as we've all thought about how society is functioning and what society needs to be vibrant. And so included in these principles are statements and expectations around labour rights, around human rights and conflict, around obviously health and safety, and around the communities where gold mines operates. And then obviously the environment, and a really important aspect for all businesses, not least in a time when we think about climate change and water use and doing that responsibly, but more broadly environmental stewardship and are thinking about biodiversity and managing over the lifespan of a mining operation. So these responsible gold mining principles are a requirement for all members of the World Gold Council. It is written into our articles that any company wanting to be a member of the World Gold Council needs to conform with these responsible gold mining principles. And I think it sets a really strong signal and sends out a very clear expectation as to what constitutes leading governance practices in a sector, and how everybody involved in thinking about gold knows and has confidence that that gold has been responsibly produced, gold has been ethically sourced. This was a process that we developed over 2 years. It ran from 2017 to 2019 with very strong input from a broad range of stakeholders, including civil society, investors, governments who play a very important role. And it is incumbent on all companies who implement these principles, whether they be members of the World Gold Council or not, to publicly disclose their conformance and how they are managing to these principles and get independent assurance. And I think we're going to see an increasing need to set out, if you like, an ESG balance sheet as well as a financial balance sheet, and have assurance on both. And this, to me, is what reimagining future of business looks like. This is about responding to the broad needs of society, serving the needs of investors and of shareholders, but demonstrating how all businesses play a broader role and are conscious and cognizant of that broader role. And why is that important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons, but one of the things that's very dear to my heart and I believe is really important is that business can play a really meaningful role in addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that are set out for governments, businesses, individuals to work on collectively to address the biggest challenges that we as a global society face. And I think that business has a very important role to play in addressing these sustainable development goals. And what we've looked at for the gold sector and gold mining in particular, in a report that we put out recently and is available up on our website, and I encourage you all, please, to go and have a look at that, is to understand the role that the gold sector plays in contributing to these sustainable development goals through employment, but also through developing the communities and the infrastructure where gold mining occurs, through building power stations, through promoting local economic development, supporting entrepreneurs who can provide local services, developing renewables. And we've seen a lot of increase in the use of renewables in the gold mining space as people realize the importance of cutting greenhouse gas emissions, but also as the opportunity to use renewables becomes very cost effective and longer term is actually lower cost than what you can see using conventional energy. So looking again as the sector as a whole, what we see is really important to set out what operating responsibly means And for the gold mining sector, that means conformance with these responsible gold mining principles, which provides this overarching ESG framework in order to demonstrate how business can play such a meaningful role, can contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's great what the gold mining industry and indeed the entirety of the gold sector is doing. And I'm looking forward to all parts of this industry reimagining the future and building on this. Whilst our focus so far has been primarily on the gold mining sector, we think this is really relevant across all of the supply chain and looking downstream as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude and finish sharing these slides. And look, I think really delighted to be part of this. I think this is an exciting time. All the challenges that have been brought to the fore in 2020 also do create these real exciting opportunities to build for the future. And very happy to see everybody who's interested in this and hopefully wants to be part of that journey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heyman. And in fact, the words you said, serving society in the right way, the ethical way, I think those words really resonate with us, especially in a post-COVID world where jobs have been lost. And if we talk specifically about gold, we're seeing a fall in demand. I mean, in India, which is one of the largest consumers or importers of gold, really, we're seeing this festive season perhaps be a little dull. What is typically the time to buy gold, the demand, doesn't have that much shine to it. So how do you see the future demand for gold?
So look, I'm actually very positive about the long-term demand for gold. Why? Because its role in meeting people's needs as a source of financial security and resilience goes back millennial, and I think that is very important and continues to be really relevant today. Absolutely, there has been a drop in demand this year in India. That isn't really a surprise when you look at the broad economic conditions and obviously the gold price that has increased this year. But one of the things that makes gold so resilient is when you see a drop in demand in some parts of the world, that demand picks up in other parts of the world, and certainly not in Indian households, but looking at in particular the ETFs and the flows into gold as an opportunity for institutional investors, very significant inflows into gold this year. And I think we will see sustained demand going forward. But obviously, that always factors in the local conditions. But looking even at India, I suspect that there is a lot of unpent demand, and that will pick up in the months to come.
In fact, I have a follow-up question around that. In India, we're sort of seeing, revenge buying already happening. It happened in China when the first wave of COVID, subsided. We're seeing, FMCG products, consumer durables going up. So are you also expecting that kind of gold buying happening in India?
Yes, absolutely. We think that will happen. The affinity for gold and that understanding that the role that gold plays in helping individuals, households, countries manage their economic security over the long term, it is really very well understood and deep rooted in India, and that is an important role. And of course, we buy gold in the form of jewelry, and it's beautiful, and we love the way it looks and the opportunity to celebrate. But there's also this really deep sense and understanding of how gold manages and protects financial security through generations. And that, I think, is so important, and that's not going to go away.
Absolutely. Just one, more question, and I'd request you to keep it brief. But, one of the programs that you work on is climate change and, the sustainable goals from the UN. How is that going? And in the future, does the focus really build in that space?
Absolutely. I think climate change is going to be a really important topic for everybody. We're seeing it a lot from the conversations we have with investors who are asking lots of questions around climate change. Gold obviously is an extractive industry, and it takes a fair amount of energy to pull gold out of the ground. But what we're seeing is a really significant move to decarbonize, to take carbon out of those operations. I talked a little bit about renewables. Anybody that's interested, there's lots more on our website looking at specific examples of how gold mines are moving to solar, are moving to hydro, are moving to electric fleets, lots of innovation and new opportunities. And I think climate and that move to decarbonize is absolutely going to be a continuing, enduring theme that everybody should be paying attention to and helping to support the goals of the Paris Accord and getting to decarbonize by 2050.
All right, that's great to know. And, before we move on to the next speaker, quickly, Mr. Heyman, where are gold prices going, up or down from here?
Look, we at the World Gold Council don't forecast on gold prices, but we certainly continue to believe that there's going to be strong and enduring demand over the long term.
Right. And off late, of course, we've seen gold prices really touch new records. Let's hope that it's more friendly to buy in the near future. But thank you very much for your words today and answering all those questions from the audience. We'll now move on to our next keynote speaker, and that's Mr. Ajay Banga, President and Chief Executive Officer, Mastercard Inc. USA. He, of course, is known for his very passionate management style. Mr. Banga stands as an entirely India-minted executive who has climbed the echelons of an international company. He strongly believes that people will value you for your transparency, your decency, and your sense of purpose. Now, today he was unable to join us live from the US, but he's been kind enough to send his address to us in a video. So we'll play that out for you, Mr. Ajay Banga. We'll just try and play that back. Mr. Ajay Banga couldn't join us from the US today, but we're hoping to play out the address that he has sent for us. We'll just play that out for you. Okay, so what we'll do now, all right. Well, Mr. Ajay Banga there, some really inspiring words. He's spoken about some things definitely that board members can ponder upon, like taking care of your employees, creating a social impact in the communities around which your business operates, a commitment to digital inclusion, and also sustainable partnerships that take everyone together to higher growth and success. Well, with that, we'll move on now to our next keynote speaker, and that's Mr. Deepak Bagla, Managing Director and CEO at Invest India. Mr. Bagla, having a professional experience of 30 years, and as part of Invest India, is actively working with industry to put together a strategy for business revival and economic growth in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're very, very delighted to have you with us, Mr. Bagla. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Radhika. It is such a pleasure. And Ajay was talking about partnerships and innovation, and I will touch upon that. But before that, I was hearing your conversation with Terry. And I wanted to tell Terry that the subject he had picked up was close to the heart of over half of India, definitely. And I did want to point out to him that 11% of the world's gold is owned by the women in India. In fact, Radhika, you and many others own more gold than the IMF, the US, Switzerland, and Germany put together. So when he was optimistic about the demand future and the prices going up, you can understand why that was happening. So let me take it back to the point. And first I must thank Mr. Ashok Kapoor. He's truly a mentor for me, and General Ahluwalia, who've been creating IOD as such a credible platform over the years. It's an honor to be here. Thank you again for giving us this opportunity from Invest India. And it was also a pleasure hearing Secretary Vadhavan. He's the one who leads all the efforts which we make. And it was always good to see how he sees India, especially in the terms of this little pandemic which we are all going through. And I will talk about this pandemic. And what I thought is, but before that, very quickly give a quick introduction on Invest India. It's the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency. We have 4 verticals to us, so as to speak. The first one is being a single point of contact for all investors, both global and local. And a part of that is helping in the straw man for policy frameworks, the FDI policy, etc. So I'll share some of my experiences of what is happening on that side and how the global community is looking at us. The second is being the execution arm of Investment India, of Startup India, which is one of the biggest movements which have happened in India and has had a huge global impact, and I will touch upon that. The third is the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative, headed by Professor Vijay Raghavan, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, and that is also Invest India as the execution arm for that. Very exciting work happening on waste to wealth and other such activities, and especially on fast tracking of innovation which is happening in the country. And these are the elements put together. So let me come back to what I thought I'll touch base and share my views with everybody and my experiences more than the views. Today, we are on day 217 of the most unprecedented lockdown in human history. And what I just wanted to share with everyone is that what has been our experience as Invest India and our experience with the global investing community during this period, and how we see India move out as we move out of this little pandemic and the virus. So let me just start with where we were on the 31st of March when this pandemic hit us. And 31st of March is also the financial closure for India, as we all know. My FDI as of the 31st of March for last year was $74 billion. It's the highest ever FDI we've got in our history. The interesting elements of that $74 billion is that over 90% of it came in what we call is the automatic route, which meant it did not require any specific approvals, which goes to show that how India remains one of the most open economies on the planet. The second one, very interesting again, over 40% of that 74 billion came in what we call is Greenfield Investment. Today, we are now one of the top 10 Greenfield destinations in the world, which actually goes to show how the global investor is now comfortable taking a long-term call on India. This is very critical. And let me just come to those three pillars where we were before we entered this pandemic. The first is, I think we'd very well positioned ourselves, and the whole world knew this is probably the single largest market base which will be open to the world at least for the next 100 years, maybe even 200 years. And why I say that, I'll be 1.5 billion customer base by 2024-25 within a single national geography and a nation structure. I don't think you'll have any of the others with a market size like that, at least for the next 100 odd years. So the largest market, which was well positioned. The second is the youngest, with an average age of 29. I think I'll be the youngest, and I'll remain the youngest all the way at least till 2080. Important, because youngest means it's an aspirational society, consumer behaviors are changing, and there's a fast track of everything which is happening in India. So whenever you talk of India, you know you're always talking of a leapfrog happening. In fact, if you really look at it, and somebody has remarked, that this is the most unprecedented exercise in human history of the pace of change at which India is changing, both in terms of the pace and the scale at which it is happening in the free democratic world. The third part, which is what I wanted to speak about, is also very critical. And this is the part about how we were well established as being the fastest growing global economy on the planet by the 30th of March, when I'm talking of. And think about it. In the past 60 months, India has raced ahead of Russia, Italy, Brazil, and France, looking at equaling Germany in the next 12 to 24 months. So moving from number 10 to number 5 as a global GDP, today over $3 trillion, looking at a $10 trillion number in nominal terms by 2030, maybe another decade, that's what I'm talking about, and maybe another 12 to 24 months, but somewhere there. That means we'll be adding $7 trillion to the balance sheets of all those who would be partnering with us during the course of the next decade. Now, what happened during this pandemic and how do we get out of it? The two very interesting things which I'm seeing, and I must share that with you. One is what I believe this pandemic has done, that it has amplified and catalyzed some of those underlying trends which were there in the economy. And let me pick up two of those. The first is we'd already started seeing an unease in the global investing community and the global business community about their supply chains being concentrated only in a few geographies. This little virus brought out that entire vulnerability. And now you're seeing a big movement of global supply chains getting onshored to where the market is. And I already mentioned to you, India remains probably one of the most unprecedented opportunities at a market space. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of global interest now coming into India for reshoring of those supply chains. And the queries which I'm seeing, business queries, in the past 200 odd days are now no longer just show me the opportunity. They're about show me where the land is, help me get the approvals. They've moved on a fast track. In fact, I'll be doing a 3x of my team. I'm currently doing that because of the increased number of queries. And put it in perspective, in the past 48 months, I've done over 200,000 business queries from across 119 countries and across 47 sectors. So the supply chain queries and onshoring is happening very fast. The second is that entire work from home, which was on the back of digitization, is now actually work from anywhere. And that means that there will be a new India as we move out of this pandemic. Now, before I come to that, let me just share with you what has happened with us during these past 217 days. As I mentioned to you, we were one of the first to go in for a lockdown. And our Honorable Prime Minister Modi took that very decisive step. And let me tell you what the results of that step have been. One of the most critical things for us was how to contain this virus and how to save lives. He was very clear in that perspective. We are day 217. I don't know how this virus is going to happen tomorrow, but as of today, let me give you a perspective of where we stand and what has been the impact of this early lockdown. And by the way, it is one of the most unprecedented lockdowns in human history, when you have over 1.3 billion people locked down across a diversity which spreads both economic and geographic across the country. And let me tell you, in a country which had one of the highest migrations in the world, just to put it in perspective, last year itself, 8 billion people, not million, billion people traveled on my metros and railways. just to show you the complexity of that exercise. Now to show with you where the results stand as of today. First, the containment of the virus. You all know India is divided into 734 districts. These are administrative districts, geographic divisions across the country. 46% of the virus cases today are confined to 20 districts out of 734. 46%. You also know that we are divided into 28 states and about 8 special territories. 86% of those cases are confined to 6 states in India. This has been an enormous feat to be able to confine it. And the reason why I'm coming to all these points is to show you that one of those 3 pillars where we were is the fastest growing large economy on the planet. The challenge was, which are those players which are going to be able to come out of this little virus fast and come back to that position? And somebody all said it very well, that we are all in the same storm, but we are in different boats. And we are all trying to row our boat as the best which we possibly can. And that is where it stands. So look at the IMF prediction, look at the World Bank one, which I was just looking at. They are saying that come 2021, which is hopefully the time when the virus is more or less curtailed, India should be very fast on track to resume an 8.8, 8.9% growth in GDP. That means coming back to that pillar of being one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. Very important. The second very interesting thing which came out in this during the course of this little virus. You see, one of the most critical things which helped us in this entire containment, in this entire unprecedented exercise, and please remember, there was no playbook in the world on how to manage this exercise. Nowhere. And you had no idea where tomorrow morning is going to be and how this virus is going to behave. But one of those things which, to my mind, not only helped us in taking care of this entire situation, but more importantly is going to be the backbone of the new India which is emerging out of Prime Minister's policies and new India coming out of that, is the digitization effort of India, which was initiated and led by Prime Minister Modi. Let me give you a quick number on that. I'm 733 million people on the net today. Every second, 3 new people are joining the net, 2 of those from a village in India. So what am I talking of? By 2024-25, I'll have 1 billion people on the net, 1 billion people on the mobile, 1 billion people connected to a bank account, and 1 billion people with a unique identity number. Just look at the powerhouse which it creates, that not only is it just an opportunity, which is one of the biggest market opportunities, but this entire digitization structure is going to give you the ability to access that market faster. Let me give you one example on that. It's unprecedented in human economic history. A brand new company can get 100 million new customers in 180 days at a cost of acquisition which was 1/5 of the global average. A brand new global manufacturing company coming into India gets 36 million new customers in 30 months, again at a cost of acquisition which was less than half of the global average. Now comes the most interesting point which has happened during the past 200 days in India. I told you there were 3 pillars of being the largest, the fastest, and the youngest. What this entire government has done now in these 200 days has announced unprecedented policy initiatives, which are now all positioned to make the 4th pillar very active as one of the easiest to do business in. That entire effort of the Prime Minister on that ease of doing business, which the World Bank called was an unprecedented jump when we moved from the 140s to the 60s. Well, let me tell you what has happened during these past 200 days. A number of my state governments have announced, if you're an MSME, you can come into India, you don't require any approval. You can take those approvals over time, over 36 months, start your business right away. In fact, I have 3,400 business clusters with specializations and small ecosystems, which are product-based and sector-based. The government is upgrading them to create a plug-and-play model. And that is why I'm seeing a large number of supply chains and MSMEs moving in fast to take advantage of that. People were talking about the long times it used to take or delays in getting approvals. Well, an empowered group has been set up by the Government of India, which is headed by the senior most civil servant, the cabinet secretary. The secretaries are there. All approvals go in for any new investments. They're done immediately. So there's a fast track on that. And a single window is now being prepared where the investor can come from anywhere digitally, globally on that platform, apply and get all the approvals. This is going to be live in the first quarter of next year. Our team is already in the process of constructing it. But very interestingly, of the 28 state governments I have, 11 already have very active single windows. In fact, one of my state governments has a global gold standard single window where you will get all your approvals within 30 days. It's deemed approval. If you don't hear from the government, it's approved. And you know what's most interesting? For every day's delay beyond 30 days, that specific government official who's responsible for it, his personal account is debited. Think of anywhere else in the world where this can happen. The third element of that, there have been new policy initiatives on incentives which have been announced in the past 150 days, and I'm seeing amazing level of results on that. We had a new electronic policy which came out, by the way, and a pharmaceutical and a number of others coming up. All these policies have been done after extensive stakeholder feedback. You know, we have Secretary Vadhavan with us. Ask him the number of hours he's spending only to get investors globally given their feedback on how they want their policy. And the results of that policy are showing how well they've been structured, both on incentives. By the way, at a 15% corporate tax, I'm one of the most competitive globally for new investments. And now we have these incentives which are based on production-linked incentives. The one on electronics policy was announced in the month of July. 31st July was the last date for global corporations to file in for it. I have each and every global major in the world which has filed in for it, for which my team is working actively to get them the land, to get them approvals, and to make it happen. Similarly, other such proposals are coming out. So what is happening in India? Our Prime Minister called it the Atmanirbhar Bharat, the self-reliant India. And the self-reliant India which he's talking about is an India which builds on its own strengths and partners with the world, not just to create the best for itself, but to create the best for the world. And let me give you an example on that. The real strength of India are these MSMEs of India. On the 31st of March, when we started this pandemic, we did not have a single PPE in India. On the 30th of July, I had a run rate of 1 million PPEs at global standards. We were creating ventilators at price points which were less than 1/3 of the global price points, and qualities which are being exported today both to Europe and the US. And where was this happening? This was the strength of the innovation of India, the MSMEs of India. And what did this MSME emerge as? The 65 million MSMEs today, which account for over 40% of my exports and close to 30% of my GDP. The strength of these MSMEs is what is going to create the new India as we come out of this pandemic. The strength of these MSMEs, which is very high on innovation, which is very high and most critical, their ability to pivot their business models and to change them fast, the best utilization of capital, and to make themselves market responsive. And what you've seen during these 200 days as a number of incentives which have gone out to this entire set of community of MSMEs, which are all set to take on a new India from that perspective. A new India, which is now going to be bottom up. The new India, which is now emerging under Prime Minister Modi, and we are actually on the threshold of it, which is the growth engine of this new India, has moved beyond the 7 and 11 metro centers to the small towns and cities. And I will give you an example of that. But before I come to that, let me give you where we stand today because of this early lockdown as far as economic parameters go. And let me just give you a few economic ones on those ones. Look at steel and cement, very important because we are looking at growth points coming up. My steel production is more or less back to where it was when we were starting this pandemic in the early part of the year. My cement is coming back there. My FMCG is already back to where it was close to last September. Very interestingly, let me leave behind 2 points with you. Rail freight movement, a very critical element to show my economic progress of goods and movements and to show how economy is picking up. My rail freight movement in September, and Secretary Vadhavan would vouch for it, was higher than it was last September. And very interestingly, the toll collection on roads, again freight movement, is back to where it was in last September. And let me give you a figure, which was the most, which was really surprised me too, because we know how MSMEs have been the most hurt in this entire epidemic. The month of July, and by the way, we are going through a period where, there's a moratorium on repayments of loans and your principals, especially during this time and especially for the entire MSME community. Even in the midst of that moratorium in July, my MSME returns or pay back to these lending institutions started the month with 60%, ended the month with 70%. And you know what's interesting? My microfinance showed collections which went as high as 90%. It is this resilience of India and that MSME and the new India based on innovation, which is going to lead the new India emerging out of this virus. And let me give you a quick example on what I'm talking about when I tell you how this growth model and that move of work from home. Radhika, I know I've crossed my time. I always do that when I get onto the subject, so bear with me for 2 minutes. This work from home actually means work from anywhere. And let me give you the example of that. I give you the example of a 19-year-old Rohit Kashyap, who is from a small district called Sitamhari in Bihar. And you know what Rohit does? He started a startup called Maytree. Maytree is a school where he actually mentors startups in and around his region and in the villages of India to help them connect to the world, to get them the best solutions which are there, not just for India, but to the entire world. This is what New India is about. So thank you very much, Radhika. My apologies. I'll cut myself short here, but I'll take it back to you. And I thought I'll just share some of these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Bagla. I think we will all agree on the point that, the data, the examples, the information that you have shared with us, surely tells us why India has jumped so many ranks in that ease of doing business list and all the positive developments that are really taking place in terms of changes in policy and, work being done on the state level as well. So here's hoping that all those efforts, being put in place at the federal and at the state level really do, turn into more investment into India, not just from within, but also from outside. Thank you very much indeed for all those thoughts. I'm afraid we can't really take any questions for you, Mr. Bagla. We'll have to move on to a very, very special talk that has been lined up. We'd like to give a very, very warm welcome to Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, author and corporate advisor, former executive director and board member, Tata Sons India. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, with more than 50 years of rich corporate experience, serves as independent director on a number of boards and is actively engaged in instructional and inspirational speaking. He has also authored a number of books. Now, this metamorphosis from a corporate go-getter to a management guru, thinker, and now a prolific writer has taken its time. I'm sure all our participants are going to be enriched with his abundant and varied experiences. We are very, very fortunate to have you with us today, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. The platform is all yours. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Radhika, and thank you very much to IOD for hosting me to share my thoughts on a subject about which I believe very passionately, and that is about wisdom. You had a long series of sessions this afternoon, and I could just hear some of them who are very distinguished bureaucrats telling you about technology and what government is doing. But I am more concerned with boards. I first got appointed to a board in 1987. So I'm a bit long in the tooth, 33 years. I've worked on more than 25 boards. And I'm talking of corporate boards. Apart from this, there are many NGOs and not-for-profit boards as well. And I have been asking myself the question that surely all boards need wise directors. But what is wisdom? And that's a philosophical subject, which you certainly are not interested in hearing at this time of the evening today. But I just want to say that wisdom is like a muscle. It doesn't come with age and experience. Anybody who's past 60 and retired is not a wise guy. Even I'm not a wise guy. None of us is a wise guy. Wisdom is like a muscle, and you have to exercise it. You must identify it, and it's only then that wisdom may come, and even that fallibly. So I would like to talk about this subject very briefly. I have lots to say on it, but I need to be coherent so that I can finish in about 20 minutes, which is what I've been told, 20 or 25 minutes. And if there is time, Radhika may ask a question. Otherwise, I'll be happy. You know, I looked at two sources on this point about wisdom. And I was recently presented a book by a person called Art Kleiner, who's a very distinguished writer and editor. And the title of the book is The Wise Advocate. Advocate not in the legal sense, but in the sense of a person who has advocacy. And it's authored by three people, one of whom is a psychiatrist, one of whom is a neuroscientist, and one of whom is a writer. So the writer's job is to bring it all together, the story together. The neuroscientist tells you what's happening in the brain circuits. And the psychiatrist is to tell you what's happening to the person's cranium. And they have used a word in the book called the inner voice of strategic leadership. The inner voice of strategic leadership. And having served as a CEO, chairman of a board, managing director, I know that there are moments when you have this inner voice of strategic leadership. And just to pluck out from that one or 2 points for the purpose of this evening, they describe that in the brain, there are two types of circuits. What they called low ground thinking and high ground thinking. Now, the words low ground and high ground are not used to suggest that one is of inferior variety compared to the other. It is just that when you stand up and in the brain, one happens at a lower level in the first floor and the other one happens in the second floor. I mean, that's all low ground and high ground means. But what does low ground thinking mean? Low ground thinking means transactional thinking. Transactional thinking. And high ground thinking means strategic thinking. So high ground thinking is about what if. High ground thinking is like an astronomer. You don't look at the earth and just look at what's inside the earth. That's the job of a transactional thinker. They are like, what is this earth a part of? It's a very different sort of an approach. And so an astronomer's view of the earth will be very different. And that's why when you see these guys going off into space and they say, my heart skipped a beat when I saw the earth from a distance, because they've never seen the earth that way. We always dig into the earth and do things. And this word low and high has certain technical terms to show the level in the mind. It's a circuit. Remember, this thinking is not happening in a particular organ. Like you can say your heart beats or your muscle is stretched. It's an activity which happens in a location. It is a circuit, and it is, if you can think of it like an electrical circuit rather than a part of the brain. So what is the difference between these two? When something is observed by us, and we do observe all the time various things, the first response happens in the low ground thinking or the transactional thinking. But after deep reflection and analysis, which the brain does perform, not always, it modifies the low ground perspective into a high ground perspective. I remember once a candidate did not turn up for interview at the right time. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning and he didn't turn up. And we said, well, if you can't even turn up for an interview on time, there's no point wasting our time. Let's go through with the other candidates. And then at about 3:30 in the afternoon, the candidate arrived looking rather disheveled. His tie was opened up and he's sweating. Bombay is a warm place. And he apologized and said, I brought you a box of sweets. So we said, this is a very funny candidate. He comes late by 4 hours. Then he says he's bought off. So what's the problem? The guy says, I knew I was to come at 11. When I went to the railway station at 9:30 or whatever, coming from the suburbs, I got a call that my wife is going to deliver. I mean, I knew she's expecting, but I didn't know that she's going to deliver that morning. So I rushed back because my wife and I have been trying to have a baby for a very long time. And this was a very important moment for me. And I'm very happy to tell you that we had a nice little boy. And I just want to share the joy of it. Whether you give me the job, whether you interview me or not is a separate matter. And we were so touched by the human experience that we had, that a person whom we had sort of blacklisted by saying he can't even come on time, he's looking disheveled, he's not well turned out, we actually interviewed him. And believe it or not, we hired him. And he turned out to be a very good employee. This is the difference between transactional thinking, low ground, and strategic thinking, high ground. All of us do it all the time. But here's the difference. And here's what I would like to say about the wise director. We are trained our mind to keep thinking of the transactional level. We react through our first impressions. And you can see this on television. I mean, every day you can sit and watch the television news. It is an epitome of transactional thinking. A said this, B said that, shouting at each other. That's transactional thinking. You watch a BBC program, you get a lot of, or you watch Fareed Zakaria, you start to see signs of a different way of thinking. And this happens because of two main M's, which I would like to mention to you, since the time is short. One is called mindfulness. Mindfulness means reflection and analysis. And the second is called mentalizing, which is trying to feel what the other person feels. And if I take that example of the guy who came late for the interview, we felt his joy of having a baby after 10 years of marriage. We felt his dilemma when he explained to us breathlessly that he was at the railway station about to get into the train, but he had to go to his wife. And we felt his joy that he went to his wife, took her to the hospital, and they had a baby boy. And that is what I mean by mentalizing. And of course, mindfulness means when we reflected on it, we analyzed, we said, I could be in that position. And between the two, we just moved the plane of thinking from the low ground to the high ground. Now, you may ask that this all sounds very good. What has it got to do with being a wise director? And I would like to take 5 examples, 2 from the political arena and 3 from the business arena. And I'm not going to expand on the examples in the interest of time, though I could write about it and talk about it separately. But in the political arena, all of us remember when South Africa removed apartheid and got independence. As you might remember, most of the African National Congress leaders at that time desired that anything that was white should be dispensed with. And there's a very famous team, a rugby team called the Springboks. And the Springboks were the pride of South Africa, a bit like our test cricket team or whatever. And it is an all-white team. Now, what do you do with the Springboks? It's the pride of South Africa. It was the top name in world rugby, but it's an all-white team. And the African National Congress people told Nelson Mandela that we must change the name of the Springboks and change its logo, because we cannot continue to have them associated with the white team. You know what Nelson Mandela did? He indulged in what I call strategic thinking. He insisted on keeping the name. He said, this is the pride of South Africa. And he himself wore a Springboks jersey when he went to see the World Cup. And it's a remarkable example of high ground thinking. I'll take a second example from India. In 1947, when India was partitioned, and the story of that partition has been written by many people, the Indian constitution was deliberately framed around the traditional concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the world, everybody in the world is ours. Our leaders at that time did not desire, and I would hope that they still do not, that India should be a Hindu state. And they wanted everybody to feel welcome here. And this is also an example of high ground thinking. The day we depart from this, we would have indulged in low ground thinking. At least that's my view. So those two are from the public affairs arena. I want to take 3 examples from the business area because we are talking about a wise director. It's after all Institute of Directors, IOD. Jamsetji Tata, who is the founder of the Tata Group, where I've been privileged to work for many years, said, he said this about 130 years ago, okay? He said in a free enterprise, remember we are a colonial country in 1890, he's talking about free enterprise. He said the community is not just another stakeholder. We tend to say there are many stakeholders. There are shareholders, there are employees, there are suppliers, there are vendors, and the community. He said it's not just another stakeholder. It is the very purpose of the existence of the company. Now look at what a lofty high ground thinking this is. And he set into motion in Tata Group a set of values and a set of principles which his sons carried on and successors carried on. And to this day, Tata is one of the most vibrant, not perfect, nothing in the world is perfect, and Tata is also not perfect, but one of the most philanthropic and people-orientated, community-orientated trusts which supports the efforts in the country. So that's a third example. After Nelson Mandela and Indian Constitution, I took Jamsetji Tata. I want to take 2 from my own personal experience on boards. The first is I used to be the vice chairman of Tata Chemicals. And Tata Chemicals used to be making something called synthetic soda ash. As the name suggests, soda ash is sodium carbonate. It's a chemical. And it is to the chemical industry what steel is to the engineering industry. Okay. So they used to make synthetic soda ash, which means that you synthesize it. There is something called natural soda ash. Just like salt. Salt can be taken out and synthesized, or you can mine it from rocks of salt. We were very keen to get natural soda ash, as it is called, which is the opposite of synthetic soda ash, because the costs are much lower. It's like mining something from under the earth. With great difficulty and after many years of waiting, we were invited by the government of Tanzania to come and help them to mine natural soda ash from a place called Natron they have in. So we were very excited, and as the vice chairman of the company, of course, I was very excited. And we encouraged the management, and we spent several $1 million doing the feasibility study and so on and so forth. Somewhere after 3 or 4 years of work, we stumbled upon something that we had just not thought about. It was brought to our notice that Natron, that particular place, is the place where an endangered bird comes and nests every year. It's called the little flamingo. And that any mining activity there is in danger of upsetting the ecosystem of the little flamingo. In spite of our having committed manpower, resources, and money, we abandoned the project. And that board meeting, I remember very well, Mr. Ratan Tata was chairing the meeting. The board said, if you are upsetting the ecosystem, doesn't matter that we spent so many $1 million, we will not go ahead with this project. And in a very respectful way, we withdrew, to the great disappointment, I have to say, of the government of Tanzania. So that's another example which is from the corporate sector, where the board acted with great wisdom. The fifth example I would like to give is when I used to be the director of Hindustan Unilever back in the 80s. I told you I joined the board in 87, and this episode that I'm about to refer to happened around 88 or 89. We had a tea plantation in Assam called Dumduma Tea Estate. And as you know, Assam was in the throes of many problems in those days. And our managers in Dumduma got a threat from the politically active parties. And they were asking for money Otherwise, they would harm our managers and their families. We were dead against Unilever doesn't pay, somewhat like Tata's, and we were dead against it. But at the same time, we felt deeply mentalizing about the anguish of the families of our employees there. We did something which was quite unusual. We went right up to the senior most people in Delhi, and the army, General Brar used to be the Major General Brar at that time in Calcutta as the GOC. The army airlifted all our employees and their families out of Dumduma. It was a magical operation, and we felt good about it. Of course, it cost a certain sum of money, but we felt that all these were good things to do, and it was a strategic, high ground thinking. Now, the world today is dominated by low ground thinking. Wherever you go, there's low ground thinking. Look around and look at the newspapers. More importantly, watch television. It's the best example of low ground thinking. Wisdom is born out of controlling low ground thinking. You cannot avoid low ground thinking. If I see a candidate, looking at the way he appears, the way he talks, I jump to some conclusions. If I see a person with a beard and a cap, I jump to certain conclusions. But that doesn't mean I should use that as the basis for my action. And discipline is what's required to push the thinking from the low ground to the high ground. Metaphorically, your low ground mind is like a noisy and jerky engine. Your high ground mind delivers through the transmission system orderly power to the wheels of the car. They're two different things. And unless you make the effort, you will not get strategic thinking. And many directors are not trained to do strategic thinking. They themselves have been operating managers or in the bureaucracy or in the legal profession. Neuro research says exactly what Vedanta has said. Now, I'm not a great fan of saying everything was invented in India long ago, but Vedanta says that you have a mind and you have an intellect. Your mind is emotional and what Daniel Kahneman calls system one thinking. Your intellect is logical, rational, and deep, and that is system two thinking. So whether you look at Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize for this work, if you look at Vedanta, or you look at the neuroscientist who's written the book, The Wise Advocate, you get the same picture. And to me, that's very significant. Modern science, traditional Indian wisdom, and what we all know is happening around us. Now, every director should aspire to be wise. Not because he has retired, he's 63 years old and he's got 35 years experience in X company or Y ministry. They are not automatically wise. And I certainly would recommend that anybody who's aspiring to be a wise director should read either the Wise Advocate book or he can read Vedanta if he prefers, because they say about the same thing in this matter. But I would very much urge Institute of Directors to include in their training courses, and I know you do a lot of this, so that you create a cadre of wise directors. Just being acquainted with accounting standards and SEBI rules and stock exchange, those are the technical aspects of what a director should do. Getting acquainted with the behavior and the human aspects is sorely lacking in our board. And it is my hypothesis, and I shall stop here because I don't want to exceed my time. It is my hypothesis that it is this aspect of wisdom where we assume that elderly people with experience are wise. That's not true. We have to learn, teach people to use their wisdom muscle that can make for much better directors. And since that's the mission of IOD, I hope you will consider my suggestion. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I hope I finished in time. You had a long day. Thank you very much. Radhika, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. You know, at the start, you posed a question. You said, "What is wisdom?" And I think wisdom is the kind of examples and your experiences that you've shared with us. And I'm sure all our attendees will be able to interpret those experiences in their own way. We do have time to take, one brief question. You yourself mentioned that at IOD, we focus on thought leadership through our international conferences, webinars, and platforms to allow for an open dialogue. We also train directors to join boardrooms and be ready to take up their roles and responsibilities in the boardroom. What would you say should be the top 3 attributes or qualities of a wise director?
Well, every director must have certain knowledge, right? Accounting standards, the stuff that you teach, SEBI, rules, regulations, Companies Act. Nobody can be an expert in everything, but you should have enough. So you must have what I call technical knowledge. That's the first thing. The second thing that you need is a peer group from whom you can learn, because it's a continuous process. I think in my 30 years, I can think of all the silly things that went through my mind and I did in 1988, 89. And I'm not perfect, but I think I have moved along the wisdom line. Hopefully, I have a little bit of wisdom now. The third thing is to consciously work on being wise, which is the methods that I talked about. So, most directors that are turned out and trained are trained in the first aspect, the ground floor. Technical knowledge, SEBI, they'll call some retired director of SEBI and he'll give a talk, some accounting firm, Companies Act. But I think a wise director is well beyond that.
Right. Right. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Gopalakrishnan. It's been an enriching experience to hear your thoughts and give us those examples. Thank you very, very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move on for the concluding remarks of the session. I would like to very warmly invite Professor Colin Coolson Thomas, Honorary Fellow, Director General, UK and Europe Operations, Institute of Directors, India, and President, Institute of Management Services, UK. Currently, he is advisor to a number of boards across 40 different countries. It's our honor to have you with us, Professor Colin. It's over to you.
Yes, thank you, Radhika. Company direction is about thinking as well as doing. And today we have reimagined the future of business from legal, governance, commercial, professional, and public service perspective. We have explored different facets of strategic foresight. We have been reminded of daunting challenges and gained insights into exciting areas of opportunity. We have peered into the future, and we have looked at envisaging future growth, future-proofing our businesses, and the future of corporate leadership and governance. To be relevant, we need to be current, and to stay relevant, we must be ever ready to listen and to learn. Today, we have looked at the need for innovation, enterprise, and entrepreneurship, the importance of inclusive, responsible...
Professor Colin, I'm really sorry to interrupt you there, but I believe your camera is off. We can't see you.
Yep, I've been pressing on my start video button, but it hasn't worked.
Okay, perhaps you could...
I'm manically trying to multitask by speaking and clicking the start video button at the same time, just to show that men can do more than one thing. But it doesn't always work. Let me try.
Well, thank you for your efforts on that front, but unfortunately we still can't see you. Perhaps you could give it another shot.
Why, because I'm pressing on it. I can see the little icon that says start video.
Right.
And I'm pressing on it, but it doesn't actually, for some reason, it doesn't start.
It may have something to do with you not giving permission to the app or the browser to access your camera.
Is it working now?
It is, absolutely. Good to see you, Professor Colin.
Fantastic. Yep, someone in the background, one of our ACE IOD colleagues has actually managed to unlock me.
Perfect. Please continue.
So shall I start again, or?
I think you could continue, sir.
I can continue where I was.
Yes.
Okay, so I was saying that today we've looked at the need for innovation, enterprise, and entrepreneurship, the importance of inclusive, responsible, and sustainable growth, and the requirement for wise company direction. We've also learned that to ride waves of uncertainty and the cross currents of different forces, whether pandemic or global warming, we also need agility, flexibility, and balance. As directors, we need quick reactions to catch what may be fleeting windows of opportunity, and the decisiveness to act or react to catch the moment. We need to be curious and willing to explore and experiment. We need the courage to have a go, and to go out in front and to pioneer and discover. Like creative artists, Directors require imagination and they need to communicate. They have to reach people and maybe challenge them to capture their attention and share a vision of a desirable, achievable, and sustainable future. To have an impact, directors need to connect and inspire. Like a creative artist, sometimes they may need to provoke to secure a reaction and achieve the awareness, understanding, and commitment needed to turn possibilities into realities. But just as creative artists need patrons and commissions, directors require backing, whether from fellow board members, employees, customers, or other stakeholders. To realize their visions and turn their aspirations into achievements, directors must attract and secure the support of others. A shared purpose encourages collaboration and co-creation. To confront the challenges we all face, meet pressing requirements, and seize opportunities to build healthier and more fulfilling lives, some directors may need to change. The boundary between company direction and entrepreneurship is blurring. The overlap of qualities required for effective directors and successful entrepreneurs is increasing. Some directors may need to undergo a metamorphosis to provide the board leadership that many younger people long for. They may need to flip and change and switch from reaction and hoping for the best to proactively making things happen. Returning to a pre-pandemic world may be neither desirable nor sustainable. To build back better, directors may have to accept and tolerate higher levels of risk. They may need to be less cautious and prudent and more innovative and enterprising. I would like to thank, at the end of an inspiring day and a fascinating day, I would like to thank all of our partners and our sponsors for actually making this possible and for their support. I would also like to thank all of our speakers for sharing their insights and for their individual inspiration. And I'd also like to thank all of you, all of the participants, for your personal commitment to remaining relevant and current. Thank you for your participation today and for your engagement. Tomorrow, we'll have opportunities to learn from yet more thought leaders about the board leadership required for the new era we foresee and to meet rising stakeholder expectations. We'll also be looking at how to enhance the performance of the future boards we envisage. We look forward to you joining us again tomorrow. Stay safe, and together we can create a better future.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Collins, for those closing remarks. It indeed has been an enriching day where we've had a lot of takeaways as we heard from very distinguished speakers all through these sessions. Of course, we'd like to thank all our speakers for giving us their time, sharing their invaluable perspective with the IOD family. We would also like to thank all our guests, all our participants for joining in today. And once again, our special thanks and gratitude to our principal strategic partner, Association of Chartered Certified Accountants UK, and principal partners, World Gold Council and the TriStar Group UAE. All these exciting conversations will, of course, continue tomorrow at 1500 hours. Thank you all once again for joining us. My name is Radhika Bajaj, and I'm signing off now. Stay safe, stay healthy.